Imagine setting out on an adventure so vast it would take over 2 years to complete, to a place that had no maps, no roads, and no way to communicate back home, in a land filled with unknown terrain, animals, weather patterns, and natives. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson put his longtime mentee Meriwether Lewis in charge of leading an expedition to document the vast area of land recently purchased from Napoleon Bonaparte known as the Louisiana Purchase. Lewis quickly chose his co-captain, William Clark, and the two created what they called the Corps of Discovery.
3, 2, 1.
To put this into modern-day perspective, what Lewis and Clark did is like sending a group of people to Mars with no radio contact, just a mission, a launch, and a hope that they might return someday and tell us what they found. Outside of a few trappers, no one knew what was between St. Louis and the Pacific Ocean. It was a huge dark spot on the map. Thomas Jefferson went so far as to think there might be woolly mammoths out there. The assignment was to gather a group of intrepid explorers to document the land, the plants, the wildlife, and the natives of this new territory, the result of which would become the greatest and most consequential adventure in American history. But they almost didn't make it, largely because they ran into one of the wildest, most inhospitable, and treacherous parts of the country, which just so happens to be my home state of Idaho. So I set out to retrace their steps and try to see this incredible adventure through their eyes. But first, I had to figure out where they actually went. To try and recreate their route through Idaho, I read several books, including the diaries of both Lewis and Clark, watched every documentary I could find, and scoured the internet to find historical markers. I then began routing via Onyx Maps to stay as close to what I could tell was the original route as possible. But after 222 years, some of the trail is lost, paved, or just not accessible. But to my surprise, much of it was drivable with a high-clearance four-wheel drive vehicle. As a kid, I learned about the story in school, but as an adult living in the western US, the magnitude of their adventure and what they accomplished by sheer grit, determination, and luck seems almost impossible to imagine today. Fast forward to 2025, and after months of research and planning, I put together a 500-mile, mostly off-road route that stuck as close to their trail as possible and in many cases was literally following their footsteps. This trip was something I'd been dreaming about for years, a way to experience both history and the rugged outdoors at the same time. Our own little Corps of Discovery consisted of my wife and our 2 kids, plus our dog Ryo. Joining us were our best friends Chris and Elsha, their daughter, and their dog Poppy. Instead of boats, we'd be driving a fleet of Jeeps. But before we could get started, Chris noticed a rattling coming from his rear axle. So with only 4 days before the beginning of our adventure, we took his Jeep into case suspension to see what was wrong. So Chris came in to get his gears looked at. What they found was bad bearings. And so we wanted to replace the bearings, but we decided maybe we should just replace the axle shafts because the axle shafts have bearings attached to them and just kind of do an upgrade on the JK. But Raffy was out of chromoly axle shafts for JK Rubicon, and so what we did is Raffy just called Metal Cloak, talked to Will over Metal Cloak. They're gonna overnight new axle shafts so we can get this done before we leave on Friday this week for a huge trip off-road. So this just goes to show, like, when you work with good people, they can make things happen for you, like Raffy and Metal Cloak. So with no time to spare, the folks at Case Suspension got new axle shafts delivered and installed in Chris's Jeep Wrangler JKU, so we could have a 4-vehicle convoy, which gave us plenty of room to store extra gas, food, and emergency supplies. All we had to do now was get to eastern Idaho and start the adventure. Welcome to Bannock Pass, which is at the eastern end of Idaho and the western end of Montana. We are attempting to retrace Lewis and Clark's expedition through Idaho back in 1805, all the while seeing some of Idaho's most beautiful, most rugged, and most remote terrain. So I think we're gonna have a good time, learn a lot, and see some beautiful landscapes. Let's go. The expedition embarked from the banks of the Missouri River in May of 1804, just outside of St. Louis, Missouri. The Corps of Discovery decided to use boats and row upstream for as far as they could. The reason being, in addition to understanding and documenting this new massive part of the United States, President Jefferson was hopeful that there was a waterway that connected the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, a mythical fantasy called the Northwest Passage. And whoever controlled this fantasy waterway would control the trade to the eastern hemispheres in the world and tap into riches untold.
Wow, that view to our left is spectacular.
The crew pushed upriver for 6 months before reaching North Dakota, where they built a fort to wait out the winter. It was here that Lewis hired Toussaint Charbonneau, a French trapper and interpreter who brought with him a 17-year-old Shoshone Native American bride who he won in a gambling bet. Her name was Sacagawea. Unbeknownst to the group at the time, Sacagawea would be invaluable. Her intelligence and bravery would be their salvation during the most difficult parts of their overland journey in Idaho. 9 months later, Lewis and Clark reached the western edge of Montana and the eastern edge of Idaho. This is where they would leave their boats behind and face a new and daunting challenge, the Rocky Mountains. And this is where our adventure would begin as well. Well, we are now officially in Montana. We've left Idaho. This is one of 2 times that we will do that as we make our way north like Lewis and Clark did. Our first destination is Clark Reservoir, and it's a really cool spot. It's a really important piece of history for the Lewis and Clark Trail because it's where they came into first contact with the Shoshone or Shoshone Native Americans. And there's a whole story that unraveled when they met. So we're gonna go to the reservoir. The kids hopefully can go swimming if they want to. We might have lunch or something. And hopefully there's some historic markers that we can find that'll help us unpack that story that unfolded when Lewis and Clark met Chief Kamehameha for the first time.
So Camp Fortunate is going to be the beginning of the whole Lewis and Clark adventure, right?
That's how I imagined it, yep.
So we arrived here at Camp Fortunate, but unfortunately, the historical marker signs that give you additional information on what happened here with Lewis and Clark are gone. They must be under repair or something. And this was where the Shoshone Native Americans were camped. And this is where the chief of that particular tribe was named Chief Kamehameha, greeted their party, and they went into a teepee to start kind of translating and figuring out who's doing what and how they might, trade together. During these interactions, Sacagawea recognized Chief Kamehameha as her long-lost brother because she was stolen from this particular Shoshone tribe when she was like 10 years old, basically put into slavery. Well, she has this reconciliation with Chief Kamehameha as her brother, and there was this big reunion that happened here at Camp Fortunate. The nature of the relationship became very positive, and they were able to do a lot of trading. They needed horses and pack mules, and a lot of that happened here during the few days they spent with the Shoshone at Camp Fortunate. So we're gonna go find a place to have lunch, enjoy the view, and maybe pretend that we're Lewis and Clark just for a second. The spot we found for lunch was a covered picnic table perched on the top of a hill that overlooked the reservoir and surrounding mountains. It was a great place to find some shade, grab a bite, take in the view, and find a few extra historical tidbits. In fact, we liked Camp Fortunate so much, we decided to see if we could find a camp spot and stay for the night. The spot we found was perched on a hill with plenty of room for the 4 vehicles and 2 families. The kids went swimming while Kate and I started making dinner for the group. So tonight for dinner, Kate and I are cooking for Chris and Elsha and Fams, and we are making what's called picadillo, which is a Cuban dish, I think.
Yes.
If you know, please correct me or confirm that's true in the comments or not, the comment section. And so I'm doing some chopping. We're browning up some ground beef. Got all kinds of interesting stuff we're gonna mash together. And I've had this before at home and it's really good, but I've never had it at camp, so we'll see. Cooking dinner on the trail together is a pretty good measure of a relationship. And after 23 years, it's safe to say Kate and I cook well together.
Yep. What do you think?
It's good.
As we sat in our comfy chairs, eating a delicious dinner, enjoying a gorgeous view, the whole crew was excited that we were off to such a great start on this adventure. Whatever good vibes started back in 1805 were still lingering in 2025. And as the sun set, it was easy to understand why Lewis and Clark spent a few extra days here. The next morning was quiet and peaceful, but as the sun got higher in the sky, we started in on what would be a big day of travel and history lessons. One of the things that we're going to do today is really start in on Lewis and Clark's path through Idaho. There's a couple points along the way that I want to stop at, either places that I know something cool happened or that there is an actual historical marker. And so we're working our way towards Salmon, Idaho, and then we're going to work our way north toward Lolo, Montana, before getting on the Lemhi Pass and going west. So today should be fun. I can't wait to stop and see some more historical places. The trail should be beautiful, so let's get started.
Well, it is a beautiful morning to be in Montana, guys.
So we came to this nondescript creek. It's called Horse Prairie Creek, and it's where a number of creeks converge, and it's also where mosquitoes converge. There are mosquitoes everywhere right here, but there's this episode that happened that I read about in Undaunted Courage where Meriwether Lewis's hunter got a deer, and the Native Americans, the Shoshone, were so hungry, they hadn't eaten in days, that they basically ravaged the carcass of this deer without cooking any of the meat. They got the entrails out there, eating the liver, the kidneys. He describes one Native American Shoshone with the small intestines, squeezing out what was in and eating on the other side of it. And it was a scene that he'd never seen before, that he comments like, I didn't know humans could eat this way. And so it's like, to me, it's a really great moment that marks the true difference between the Western civilized world meeting the Native American world, and how different they actually were, and how they lived, their philosophies, how they ate, how they dealt with hunger, all those things. It was the first time any American had spent any time with a Rocky Mountain tribe, the Shoshone. And that stark difference, I think, is really, really cool. And since we're crossing this creek, I wanted to stop and take a look.
And now we've beaten through our entrails.
We were now making our way toward two very significant historical markers, the first of which was an ending to the hope of finding a Northwest Passage waterway from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. These Montana rolling hills roll right up to the border of Idaho, which not only marks the passing from one state to another, but also the Continental Divide and the headwaters for the mighty Missouri River. It's at this point in the country where on one side of the mountain, all waters flow into the Atlantic Ocean, and on the other, all waters flow into the Pacific Ocean. To Lewis and Clark, this signaled that there was no singular waterway to connect both oceans. It also meant that if they could find the right river on the other side of these mountains, they could start rowing downstream toward the Pacific Ocean instead of the upstream journey they'd suffered so far on the Missouri River. Tucked away along the ridge of the divide is the Sacagawea Memorial Picnic Area, a place that marks the headwaters of the Missouri River, and for us, a spot to stop and have lunch.
We're going to come to the Sacagawea Memorial Picnic Area.
The area has lots of shade and picnic tables and decent bathrooms. We were there in early July, and the flowers were in full bloom as we made our way down the walking path toward what we were shocked to call the Missouri River. So not only is this like a great homage site to Sacagawea, it's the source waters for the Missouri River. So we are on the Continental Divide, and everything that flows down this direction ends up in the Atlantic Ocean, and everything on that side of the divide ends up in the Pacific Ocean. So this little teeny tiny stream is where the mighty Missouri River begins. The other thing that's important about the Missouri River and Lewis and Clark is that they had been coming upstream in the Missouri River for a lot of their journey. So for Meriwether Lewis to get here and see what he calls like the most distant spring of the river that they were on before must have been pretty spectacular. And it's a really great place to stop for lunch.
Thanks for that stop. It was really fun.
So glad for it.
Having crossed back into Idaho and now on the Pacific side of the Continental Divide, we started heading toward our second significant historical marker. But before we could make it to the next marker, my mapping skills were put to the test. I decided to veer off the main road and take the convoy down a rougher trail in an attempt to follow their route as closely as possible.
All right, folks, we're getting ready to leave this main trail.
Well, we just turned off kind of a main dirt road onto a much less driven trail. And so this is the first time I really feel like we're departing what's like kind of maintained roads and really getting into the trek that's much closer to where Lewis and Clark actually took their convoy. They were still with the Shoshone Native Americans at this point. They were making their way down toward the Salmon River. And there's a spot up here where Meriwether Lewis first came in contact with Shoshone, and that was the beginning of the relationship that he had with the Shoshone and with Kamehameha. And so hopefully this trail goes through and we can find that spot where they first made contact. For those who love off-road driving, this kind of trail is a lot of fun. For the first time on the trip, it felt like we were deep in the Idaho mountains, with no real certainty of whether or not this trail would lead us to the next marker.
Well, folks, this is why we have Jeeps.
I think this is awesome, Will.
Regardless of where this takes us, I'm having a ton of fun.
I knew I was on the right track though, because I kept seeing these old faded posts with a Lewis and Clark emblem on them. So we kept heading the same direction, hoping we'd keep seeing those markers.
You guys have no idea how much it tickles my heart that I made this route and it's truly sticking to what Lewis and Clark did.
It's nice when a plan comes together.
It's like we got a little gate and then a little creek crossing.
Just after this water crossing, we faced a little pucker moment when we had to climb a very steep hill with loose gravel. But you know what they say, when in doubt, throttle out.
Just go ahead and give it the skinny pedal.
You can't see where you're going when you go over that hill, but it was fun. I made it.
At the top of this hill was the ridge that led to the next historical marker on the trail, the flag unfurling site.
Wow.
So this is the spot where Meriwether Lewis first made contact with the Rocky Mountain Native American tribe, and this happened before he met Chief Kamehameha. So this is where he ran into the Shoshone Native Americans, and then they brought him back to Camp Fortunate, and that's where all the good stuff happened. So it seems like we're going backwards, but we're not. He met him here, they went back there, and then they came back this way towards the Salmon River. So we're about to drop down near Salmon, Idaho, and get our first look at the Salmon River.
Is that salmon right down there below us?
It is.
So we're just outside of Salmon, Idaho, and there's this place called the Sacagawea Interpretive Center, and it's these really beautiful grounds with an amphitheater. It's some additional information on Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea and that Native American Shoshone tribe that she was part of. So we just came through and there's a nice little path with some shade on it. We walked the dogs through it, read some new information, and I think we're gonna get back on the trail. But if you're coming through Salmon, Idaho, it's definitely worth a stop. I'm just driving along the Salmon River now, and Meriwether Lewis sent William Clark ahead to see whether or not the Salmon River was like a viable waterway for transport. Because they had used the Missouri River a ton. They kind of knew how to navigate a river, even if they're going upstream. But he got down to the Salmon River and he took a look at it, surveyed it, and he was like, there's no chance we're gonna be able to use this river to transport. It's shallow, it's rocky, there's rapids everywhere. It's in these really narrow canyons, so there's no way to like have horses pull us upstream if we need and all that. So it was at that point that they decided that they needed extra horses, and that's when they started basically scavenging for horses from any Native American tribe that they came across until they got up to Lolo and cut across the Bitterroot Mountains. So Salmon River is a beautiful, beautiful wild and scenic river, but not great if you're trying to find a water path to the Pacific Ocean.
We weren't looking for a water path, though. We were looking for a campsite. In an effort to stay where Lewis and Clark camped, we tracked their path to what has now become a ski mountain and took the cat track roads up and over to access the same ridge as they did back in 1805. We were now literally crossing back and forth between Idaho and Montana at almost every turn. And as we climbed higher, we left the dry foothills and entered a classic forested mountain range that was beautiful to see.
Well, if nothing else, this is an outstandingly beautiful road.
Yeah, it is.
By the way, this is, by my calculations, the route that Lewis and Clark were actually taking.
After passing over the ski area, we were able to access the ridge I had hoped for, and were once again feeling like we were right on top of their footsteps. Lewis and Clark climbed this ridge on their way north, and while the view must have been breathtaking, the seemingly never-ending sea of mountains must have been daunting to acknowledge.
We've been driving along this incredibly beautiful mountain road, and it terminates here at Saddle Mountains. Now up here, I think it's level. I think we could get 4 vehicles up here and camp, but Kate, Chris, and Elsha have found a spot that's a little bit farther down the hill, and they think that it'll be a little bit less windy down there, so I'm gonna head back and join them and set up camp. But wow, what a spectacular road, what a spectacular view up here in every direction. It's just unbelievable.
Tonight, it was the Taggart's turn to make dinner, so I was very interested in what Elsha was cooking up.
So Elsh, what are you making for dinner?
I am making pad ki mao, which is Thai drunken noodles. So I've got chicken, I throw in some extra veggies for the kids, got my rice noodles going, got sauce and green onions, so should be pretty delightful once it's all done.
You win the award for Spirit Hat. Look at this thing. It is quite the hat you got on there.
I've got to give my challenge ladies a shout out. Pavla and Nicole and Julie all came out to Idaho. It was the first time for Nicole and Pavla to come to Idaho. We all went camping up in the Sawtooths. We got 8 inches of snow. It was amazing. We still got a 4.5 mile hike in, so it was just an epic adventure.
So they got a real Idaho experience then.
They did. Snow and summer on the solstice, what can I say? And then we had a hat, and so they picked up the patches for me.
Elsha, this is so good. Thank you so much.
Awesome. I'm glad you like it.
Chris, Zero thanks to you. As we settled into our home for the night, I started thinking about the magnitude of feelings the Corps of Discovery must have had when they reached this ridge 220 years ago. Meriwether Lewis got up to a point where he could look to see all the different mountain ridges around, and he basically went, oh shoot, we have to cross those mountains because they're never ending. Tonight we're enjoying this incredibly beautiful campsite, but you know, in 1805, when they were looking at this, it wasn't a pleasant evening that they were looking at. They were looking at one of the biggest challenges of their lives, and one that almost killed them. And tomorrow we're gonna get closer to that part of the expedition and discovering exactly what happened as they got closer to where they were gonna cross the Bitterroot Mountains. But tonight, we're gonna enjoy the sunset and enjoy a lovely view. I've been on lots of trips in the backcountry, and I'm a sucker for a good historical story, but this attempt to trace history at every turn was creating a new context and feeling for me. There's something about this story that taps into my pride for being American. It felt like an embodiment of the idealism and sense of adventure that threads through the subconscious fabric of our American culture, a bond with no political affiliation, a celebration of the undeterred spirit to be afraid and still move forward, because that's what we do. And in some small way, it's why we were out there camping on a ridge, talking about 1805.